Hi, and welcome to the Design Systems Podcast. This podcast is about the place where design and development overlap. We talk with experts to get their point of view about trends in design, code, and how it relates to the world around us. As always, this podcast is brought to you by Knapsack. Check us out at knapsack.cloud. If you want to get in touch with the show, ask some questions, or generally tell us what you think, go ahead and tweet us at the DS Pod. We'd love to hear from you. Hey everybody, welcome to the Design Systems Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Strahl. We're doing our special episode at config. What do you guys think it is?
I say config.
I think it's config.
Gosh, well, I'm in the minority, but that's okay. So I'm here with Jina and Adekunle Oduye. Welcome, y'all. It's good to see you, friends for years now. So great to have you back on. You're just coming fresh from the Figma keynote. Talk to me about it. How'd it go?
I have thoughts.
Yeah, so first of all, I heard it was crazy. I heard the lines were insane. I heard that there was like a mob of people. It was like 14,000 people all trying to fit in this place. I've been in the studio all morning, so I haven't actually gotten to the conference venue yet. Give me a sense of the vibe there.
So I was walking across the street and I see this line going all the way down the street and like around the block. And I realized that's just the line for people that didn't get their badges yet. And pro tip, if you find yourself at config, go to early registration. Do not skip early registration, because there were people that flew in for this and were in line for the entire keynote, and they're still out there in line right now.
That's crazy. Crazy.
Yeah, I ain't gonna lie. I thought I was in the wrong place because I was like, wait, is this like a Usher concert or something? Like, I thought it was something different. And then I got to the back of the line. They're like, oh, no, you don't need to be here. And I was like, okay. Because I was about to go back to my hotel. I was like...
Yeah. No, it's we had somebody on our team that was waiting in line like an hour and a half for their badge.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was so glad I had mine, because if you have your badge, you were able to just walk right in.
So how was it? What did Dylan talk about? What did you guys see, hear? Tell me the high points.
The thing I did think was cool of how they started it to hype everyone up is they had this little reel playing of like the evolution of UI since the very first like computers. And so that was kind of a fun way to open it. Yeah, so Dylan starts talking about the community, and then he goes into and like, oh yeah, and we're redesigning the UI, which is really scary because we're designing for designers. And so he was showing the new UI, and my first reaction was like, okay, cool, rounded corners, great. But then when he started showing that you can actually like hide and move things around and resize things, I was like, okay, cool, like that's definitely needed.
Yeah, there was the whole designing for designer moment right there, like Gina's skepticism around the corners. What is it, flat design too? No, just kidding.
It's probably going to make a comeback. You never know. So.
Yeah, well, it all goes in cycles, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So eventually we'll get back to like green on black, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's cool. So like 30 years of interfaces kind of roll out, and then you get to see sort of how the evolution of the Figma interface is looking.
Yeah. He said that he knows change is hard, so they're going to be rolling it out like little by little, and you'll be able to switch back and forth for a while until they finally like let go of the old UI.
Can you imagine being that product designer that is just sitting there being like, there's like 1 million people that use this every day.
Yeah.
And they're all going to critique whatever it is that comes out of here.
And it happens all the time, especially like anytime Facebook gets like a redesign or anything happens, they're like, oh, this is ugly. And now they get used to it. And I like that approach where they kind of just like little by little, because people might just like freak out and not use it.
I did think it was funny when Dylan was like, can you imagine designing a new Figma in the old Figma?
It's very meta. Yeah. It's like when Knapsack makes its own design system. We're always like, well, it's a design system that powers a tool to make design systems. This is like a lot of meta that you live in.
Yeah.
Awesome. What else? What was the thing that was probably like the most surprising or most like wow moment?
Well, I don't know if wow is how I would describe how I felt, but I kind of had a weird dystopian feeling when he went into demoing generating designs based off of a prompt. And, you know, it's basically doing all the work that we normally would be doing in Figma. And so I kind of had this image of an Ouroboros snake eating its tail kind of situation where I'm like, okay, if there's no more designers because Figma does it all, who's paying for Figma?
Yeah, exactly. And I was kind of also shocked because people were excited and clapping. And I was like,
yeah, it was weird.
This is going to replace like half of y'all. So that's one of the things, you know, we're all constantly thinking about, like AI is coming. So how are we going to adapt? And how to survive. A lot of it was revolved around like design systems too. So I think that's the thing
I was
too.
like, well, there goes all my work. I guess I'll go be a bartender now.
I mean, it's kind of what we always wanted to do anyway, right?
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, with the advent of the AI capabilities, what were the types of things they were generating? Like, what were they making?
First, he was generating like a website, and he was using prompts like it was like a Lord of the Rings reference, and so it not only generated the website, but it even generated images for like the placeholder images, and of course they were all like Lord of the Rings themed because that's the prompt he used. But then he does show like some UI kit stuff, and I just remembered they partnered with both Apple and Google to get those UI kits directly into Figma.
Nice.
So you can just drag that into your stuff. And then they made their own design system. I think it was called like Figma Simple or something like that. So you have those components you can drag in. So pretty much all the components are like in Figma now.
Gotcha. And it's all like a structured system that has like a lot of general applicability. It doesn't necessarily feel like, hey, here's material inside of Figma. It's a lot more like, hey, this is actually a root set of content.
Yeah. And historically, people have been like cloning the Figma UI kit for material or for iOS. And then when Apple or Google makes an update, you kind of have to do that all over again. But now it's like it just lives already in the tool. So you'll get the updates as they update.
Interesting. I wonder how they were going to solve like the upstream problem with that. With like, all right, so something in your design system updates. How does that then update all the interfaces you've built with that design system? Do they go into that at all?
I don't think so, but I'm assuming it's kind of the case where it's like it'll tell you about the update, and then I guess you'd be able to like preview it. I'm kind of thinking about like GitHub or kind of how we do that kind of stuff where it's like you see like past and you see the current and whatnot. But it's going to be interesting because it's a UI tool. So I feel like it's going to be more complex. So it'd be interesting to kind of see that, how that pans out.
Talk to me about the connection to code that they were talking about too.
They expand upon like the dev mode where ideas like you have a designer creating some like designs and whatever like that. And then it's kind of, I don't know if there was like more into like the dev mode.
So you can like tap directly into like React components. And like also there was like this mode of this component is now dev ready. So a dev would see that and then like be able to see what changes were made. And basically at the tweets I was seeing where people were like rest in peace storybook, which I don't think is actually going to happen. But yeah.
Yeah.
I've always wanted Figma to be more in tune with code. And so I am intrigued by being able to like actually have it really truly connected into like your React code base, or like, I don't know if they're going to try to do more than React, but they'll probably have to.
So in the idea of digital production, like obviously Figma still considers it the origination point, right? And I think that there's a lot of question marks in my mind about that structure of the ecosystem. And I'm actually like really hopeful I get to talk to some of the folks from Figma about it while I'm here. Is if there was one question I could ask like the Figma CPO, it would be like, okay, so there's lots of people at Figma and lots of people at this conference that look at what's happening and they look at the traditional production workflows and they say like, all right, yeah, sure, everything originates in design. And you go make a bunch of stuff in design and then you go give that to a bunch of engineers that go build the thing that you just designed. But there's also this new production workflow that's getting closer and closer and closer to the products we build, which is ultimately about code. And so I think Figma is doing a great job of meeting corporations where they're at, where most organizations aren't willing to completely upend the way they build product right now, and basically said like, no, we should start with code. But there is this sort of inclination that that's where the universe is headed, is we're all going to start to use code building blocks via AI tools or whatever to be able to create these assemblies of components, these compositions, directly in the medium that something's destined for. And that ostensibly doesn't include Figma in that production workflow. And so I'm really curious, as Figma is evolving and as it's changing, how much is it reliant upon a canvas to be the origination point of creation versus just working directly with code? And what does that representation look like? I think there's a lot of questions there about the future of this market. And it's all being like massively disrupted right now because of AI and all this giant upheaval. And I'm not surprised that they demoed some AI tooling, right? But I think, Jina, kind of to your earlier point, not that many designers want to live in a world where the fun work is done for them. They want to live in a world where the boring work is done for them. And so I kind of wonder like what form this ultimately takes. And I'd love it if you two could just like speculate or dream with me for a second here. about config next year. So if we're sitting here next year and we see what's happened, like what has taken off and what has continued to garner that investment, and what has basically been something that has been either like discarded or let go of.
Yeah, I think a lot of, especially AI, and even like the stuff we do is like, we just want to basically make it easier and make it faster, and you don't want to do the boring stuff and whatnot. So I think a lot of time, especially when you're working as a designer or developer, it's kind of like you having the same conversations over and over again. And I think for me, like how I imagine is like, all right, I want to focus on like those right problems, like talking to users and all this other stuff around like UI. I don't want to say it goes away, but you know, Figma kind of takes care of it, or the AI or whatever like that. Again, I don't like to use like the prompt designer, but there's going to be some sort of that happening and whatnot. So that's one thing I'm like interested in seeing, because obviously like if you have designers be more empowered to make like something that's based from code and they don't have to like go back and forth, I feel like that opens their jobs to do other stuff. But I don't know how that looks going to look like. And I think that's the one thing I'm super excited about. But Gina, what are your thoughts?
Like when I think of the quote unquote boring stuff that I don't enjoy in Figma, it is things like auto layout. And they did show they have a new feature where it'll suggest the proper structure, and like, so I don't need to concern myself with how do I nest this? How do I group things?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to suggest it based on the way you've designed it. But it also means you've designed it flatly, you know, kind of like back in Photoshop with layer on top of things. So it's going to probably need you to like make sure that you've lined things up in a way that it can recognize. And he did say like the more complex, the more it's likely not going to do the right thing. But the simpler your component is, the more likely it'll do the right thing. So I'm like, that it does make sense for automation, because I'm like, nobody really enjoys sitting there grouping and nesting and, and like playing with auto layout. But at the same time, part of the reason I'm not a fan of auto layout is because it doesn't even really represent what's going to happen in code anyway. And I'd rather do it in Flexbox or do it with CSS Grid. And so like my hope is that maybe if they do decide to let go of features, as Dylan even implied, like they want to simplify and remove some things, is like, yeah, get rid of drawing boxes and get rid of having a canvas and like actually have real code. Like I want my Figma to feel like Webflow, where when I'm designing, it's actually writing CSS and writing HTML.
Interesting. That's an interesting take.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like that idea of how do you actually use the code to compose. And I also think that they're probably right to talk about like this as a spectrum of complexity, where your AI tools are going to be really, really accurate as long as the things that you maintain are simple and low level. I think that it's also the design system use case, right? That aligns really closely with what we all talk about of like, you know, like have your foundational components be really, really simple things and then compose them together to create the complex things. And if Figma can aid in that composition process, that's awesome. And that also is a really nice tie into code, because a lot of where those compositions happen is actually in code, where you're taking a button and putting it in a card, or 3 buttons and putting it in a card. I think that like if I were to dream a little about where we might be at next year, I think that the 2 things that I see as being really important is this idea of like, okay, yes, the Gen AI side of things, right? But like Gen AI to what end? And I think that that is going to go through a major evolution. And what we're going to start to see is you're going to start to see Gen AI to either like more personalized experiences or lots of different variations of experiences that we've never been able to create before. Most organizations have a hard enough time with light mode, dark mode. So imagine the ability to leverage, you know, well, Figma only gives you like 4 modes, but like imagine the ability to leverage 20 modes.
Yeah.
Because you have Gen AI tools that are able to know the difference and fill those gaps. And I think that there's like an awesome era for accessibility there as well that Gen AI can really help with. Because all that stuff that tends to be a byproduct or tends to be in the background, like that can suddenly be in the foreground. And then I think the second thing is like the systems approach, and kind of like Gina, you were talking about like the deeper connection to code. And I mean, again, like not RIP Chromatic. I think that they're great and they have a great product that works awesome for engineers. But I think that like, how can you have a deeply intimate tie between the thing that you make in Figma and the association in code? And that's really hard right now. And I don't think it has to be. And I think that like Code Connect is a big step in the right direction. I think that a lot of the stuff that we're trying to do with Knapsack with the API into Figma has been much better recently. But the ability to basically say like this thing in design is this thing in React or Angular or whatever framework you're using, that is the future. And I'm excited to see where that goes.
Yeah, and something you said sparked the thought in me of like, if they're already working with Apple and Google to build UI kit stuff directly in Figma, why not also directly tap into the Android platform and the iOS Swift? And so like, I do feel like we're moving into this world where like a lot of that stuff is done. We're supposed to then be able to innovate on these features. Like the stuff that you were just talking about that I'm really excited about when it comes to the future of our profession is these personalized experiences. Like if I'm left-handed, right-handed, if I have an astigmatism, if I go from being in a busy, crowded bus to being, like how does the UI just completely adapt and change based on context, based on my personal preferences, like all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, internationalization, like,
Yeah.
The idea of different cultural considerations for space.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, there's all sorts of really cool things that you could do with experiences that are all possible today, just extremely expensive and time consuming.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's why I feel like it's going to make it easier for designers to kind of really focus on like building the best experience where I can like build a product. All right, cool. I want it to be accessible. I wanted to have it where it's like, I want to be using like US, but where, maybe it's like something about success and like things are like, oh, that's green. In Asia, they like to use red as more for like, oh, that's like good luck, whatnot. So
Right.
kind of it adapts to kind of like what Gina was saying, like many different scenarios. And I feel like that's going to make it easier to build products more for not people like just in the US, but like all across the world. So that's the thing I'm like super excited about.
Definitely. Well, you all are also writing a book right now. And I think that this is fun and cool to have you all on pre-release. So can you give us a little preview about what you all are going to be talking about?
Sure. So it's interesting because we were just talking about like AI and like, career, I guess, longevity.
Yeah.
But the book we're writing is really based on the things we've learned in our own career journey in design systems and things like we wish we had known before. And as people are entering this profession, like you might go to design school or go to engineering school, but they don't really teach design systems.
Right.
Or if they do, it might be like a class,
Mm-hmm.
but also just like how to be successful in design systems. So the things that we talk about are like understanding like what are the different kinds of roles within design systems, because it's not just like designers and developers. Sometimes you also have other aspects.
Content people,
Yeah,
product
exactly. Accessibility, even product management. So we kind of talk about like the different types of roles. We also are planning to interview some like people in our community that we think like what we observe to be like a really great successful career so that they can share their stories. Like people like Diana Melter that started as a designer at GitHub and now she's head of design and like what an amazing career she's had.
Yeah.
She's one of the first people I ever met in design systems. It's funny. I don't know if she'd even remember me, but the first time I was at Clarity in New York, I actually ended up at a meetup and got to meet her there. And it was just when I was getting started in this whole space.
Yeah. And if Diana's hearing this before we do the interview, yes, we're planning to talk to you.
Gotcha. Interview date TBD.
Yeah. But then, we also want to talk about the job search and hiring process, what kind of questions you might be asked in the interview, what kind of things should be in your portfolio. And then we go into the third part, which is really on continuous learning and growth and like how you level up in your career and whether that's the IC path or the management path.
So there's like a career blueprint attached to it as well.
Yeah.
And it's mostly, I feel like I always get this question a lot. I kind of like stumble in this kind of career, but I think from like my perspective is like, all right, someone that's coming out of school is like, I want to do design systems. All right, how do I make that happen? Because I know that even for me, like one of the biggest hurdles is just kind of like promotions within design system. And that's like a whole...
What's your career pathway, right?
Yeah.
Like when I was at Salesforce, I remember my manager was putting me up for promotion and he got a lot of pushback because people were like, well, Gina's not shipping new features to users. These other designers do that. And the way he advocated for me and the other designer on my team is like, they're the bass players. Like you need the bass player to keep the rhythm going. And like what you might see is like the lead singer, the lead guitarist that are shipping the features. They can't do what they do without these people. And so it worked. We got the promotions.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. We're also hoping that it's not just people wanting a career journey reading this. We're actually hoping hiring managers will read it.
That's great. When can we expect to see it?
That's a good question. I'm hoping that like, and Gina, keep me honest. Maybe we could do like have it like a rough draft available by end of this year, maybe start of next year.
That's the hope.
Yeah,
Gotcha. So coming Q1 2025.
Yeah.
I can't wait. I'm really excited to read it and chat more about it. But thanks to you both for being on today, especially in this like fun little impromptu chat. So,
I did want to share one more thing about the keynote today that I am excited about.
Yeah, dive in.
It was hilarious because like this was the feature that got the whole room clapping and excited. Figma slides. Presenter notes in Figma. That I'm excited about, like big time.
I love the idea of the move into the collaboration space because that collaboration communication, that's where Figma shines for me.
Yeah.
But I also don't do a lot of design, so.
No, but I think that's the great point is like, you got business people, designers, developers, like everyone loves Figma, which is like, I never seen a tool that like basically brings like all these people with different disciplines together. So that's why I enjoy it too.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks again to you both. Really appreciate you being here. Appreciate you jumping on the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
This has been the Design System Podcast coming at you from Config. Have a great day, everyone. That's all for today. This has been another episode of the Design Systems Podcast. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions or a topic you'd like to know more about, find us on Twitter at the DS Pod. We'd love to hear from you with show ideas, recommendations, questions, or comments. As always, this pod is brought to you by Knapsack. You can check us out at knapsack.cloud. Have a great day.